Well, hello everybody. I hope everybody's having a great day. It is Wednesday, the 25th, about 1:38, something like that. So let me think. Today we're going to have our lecture on the psychological evaluation. Now, if you go into the files section, and I think it's the first item in there, it's a neuropsychological evaluation for some of the work that I'm doing with clients that are exposed to toxic substances. In this one, it actually would be lead paint. So when the kid was born and ages 0, 1, 2, 3, eats lead paint, causes basically the lead is a toxic material and essentially causes brain damage that affects them developmentally, then academically, then vocationally, and then when they get to be about 18, 19, 20, 21, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, then I meet with them and evaluate them and put together a rehabilitation plan and perhaps go to court and testify. So what you see in there will be a neuropsychological evaluation from Johns Hopkins University. You probably have never ever seen anything like this before, but I want you to know what the real world looks like, so to speak. So this chapter is on psychological evaluation. To me, a neuropsychological is actually even more information because not only is it psych, but it's also neurology. So you have an expert that's expert in both things and opining on how would this neurological disorder, in this case brain damage, affect them psychologically and so on. So if I were you, I would just print it out and take a look at it, maybe hit pause on the record now, and then as we go through our lecture today on the psychological evaluation, you'll see the pieces or components to the neuropsych eval, and perhaps it might make more sense to you what I'm speaking about, but it's up to you. You do what you want. Another housekeeping thing. Quiz number 1, if you look on your syllabi, it says that we're going to have 5 unannounced quizzes. If we were on campus, it'd be different. I would just hit you up in class. Well, here's a quiz. Good luck. And quite frankly, I think online is easier for you. And there's also empirical evidence showing that people that have time to take this, it's essentially like big discussion questions. You'll have 2 hours to take the exam or quiz. It's not going to be any surprise. It's on the 2 of the chapters that we went through. And since you already answered a discussion question about it, some of it's going to be in your brain anyway, so I don't think it should be that difficult. If you're one of the students that reached out to me regarding disability support services, I've noted in the system that you will get a little extra time, so there's not a problem. But if you have any questions, let me know. That will be due a week from now. So next Wednesday by 11:59, the end of the day, is when that will be due. The personas, I think they've all been graded. I think we caught up on all the grading for the discussion questions. The next thing on the horizon is the community resource paper. That's not due till November 6th. I know that I've gotten some emails from students about the community resource paper. Remember, it says on the syllabus, in-person interview. That means you go there and you see it with your own 2 eyes. And hopefully not only will you interview with like a counselor or someone at the site, but perhaps get a tour of the facility and do your homework. Look at their webpage and whatever documents you can get your hands on before you go to this interview so that you look intelligent and you can ask really good questions and things along that line. We're making good progress on the DQs. I know that Jenny's been giving you feedback. If you have any questions about any specific things, I know that I did get an email from a student asking when is it appropriate to say et al, E-T space A-L period, meaning group of authors and things of that nature. Minimum 3, but normally if there's 4 plus, many times like if I'm publishing a study that I've done, say with a couple doc students, it will actually say on the top, kind of like a running head, for lack of a better analogy, on the journal, it will say like Beveridge et al. They usually do that when there's me plus 3 others. I know the APA says 3 or more. I personally don't care. If you want to cite in your DQs or quizzes DQs, quizzes, or even the essays, I've been kind of lenient on those, but just put et al. If there's 3 or more, that's fine with me. No, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. So try to print out the neuropsych eval. I think if you look at it, you'll be like, oh my God, what is this? I mean, for me, when I'm working with a client / evaluee or a case, that's probably one piece of 100 pieces of the puzzle. So I look over a lot of stuff. But let's talk about the psychological evaluation. It's kind of like the same idea as the medical evaluation that we spoke about last week, but this time it's psychology or, a psychiatric condition that is of primary importance, or might be the primary diagnosis or secondary diagnosis. And the bottom line is trying to figure out how the client / consumer's ability to cope with their situation they're in, life's demands, and that would include, of course, vocational, because we're rehabilitation counselors, but also social settings, especially if it's a person perhaps diagnosed along the autism spectrum, then they're going to have social deficits, if you will. For example, interviewing. They're not going to look the person in the eye. They might not be speaking that well. They might not be able to answer questions right off the cuff. But essentially what we want to do is kind of predict areas or vocational environments that will give them problems. For example, a person that's real nervous and might have anxiety problems, you can't turn them into a salesman. It's just not going to work. So this is information that the rehabilitation counselor needs to read, understand, and digest, and thus take that and infuse the main points into our evaluation. Or again, we're not looking at the client holistically and doing the best job we can. It's our job, or one of our jobs, is to secure the vocational rehabilitation services that the client / consumer will need to be able to achieve their goals. So we need to really look at all the pieces of the puzzle and look at them holistically. So we would want to know about what are their interpersonal skills or lack thereof. Do they have the ability to learn new information? For example, if the person has a brain injury, traumatic brain injury, maybe, if what we tell them in a minute or two is going to be gone, they're going to forget it. Well, if that's the case, then we're not going to invest in a retraining program, right? It'll be money down the drain, and it's not going to be successful. So also, emotional stability. In a lot of the work that I do with veterans, that's kind of an issue because especially if you have like a mild traumatic brain injury and then you're discharged from the military and you're taking pain medications and maybe diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, then sometimes what happens is, you come back from the war and you're butting heads with your wife or husband, and it's just not working out as both parties would have liked or hoped. Which could, of course, lead to emotional problems that perhaps we need to get on board with. Maybe refer them to an appropriate provider, medications, talk therapy, and so on. And all these things flow into our vocational goals, obviously. I mean, hopefully that's a given. So what data do we need for a good psychological eval? Well, we need statements from that psychological or psychiatric expert on how they will react in certain situations. Are they going to function effectively or ineffectively? If it's the latter, then are there certain perhaps accommodations that we can think of ahead of time and maybe do a job analysis and include the psychologist in maybe modifying the work somehow? But really comes down to the if you think of John Holland, congruence or the fit between the person and their personality and who they are and what makes it tick, and the workplace and what they demand and what they require to hopefully fit together like a glove and a hand or a lock and a key. Our job is trying to find the occupations or jobs that really fit all of our unique circumstances, variables, background that makes this person who they are. And of course, we're just predicting. So sometimes 1 + 1 does not equal 2 when you're working with a human being. Sometimes people act irrationally or I remember getting people trained and on the first day of the job, them just walking off the job after a few minutes, and after investing a year of time or 2 years of training or who knows what. And that can be very challenging for the rehabilitation counselor, quite frankly. We go to bat for them, we get the resources, we get them through the training. Now it's time for the rubber to meet the road and go to work, and it just falls apart for whatever reason. I remember one case where the guy was, when I first met with him, English was a second language. He was a roofer, and he's from El Salvador, and he really didn't speak that great of English and had no computer skills. But over time, I hooked him up with his church. We got English as a second language courses for free. I sent him to the public libraries to get all the free computer training possible. I found an employer willing to do an on-the-job training, OJT, meaning when he was my client, he would still get his disability checks, with the deal being, okay, I'm going to show up for this work and volunteer my time. And then my deal with the employer is, okay, if Johnny does everything right, at the end of 30, 60, 90 days, whatever, you're going to offer him a job. So basically everything that I just talked about happened perfectly. We were in this big fancy conference room. The president and like the big shots of the organization we all got together. Okay, great. We're going to give Johnny this great job. Everything worked out fine. And in the middle of the meeting, Johnny says, well, I think I just want to work part-time. My head almost exploded. But of course, as a counselor, I'd be like, oh, okay, let's talk about that. And, do you mind if I have a few minutes with my client? And of course, I was able to salvage that job. But it's a perfect example of, we went through all this stuff. We had the rehabilitation plan. The person knew exactly what the game plan was. But right at the end of the, at the goal line, if it's football, or if it's a 100-meter dash, 99.9 meters, all of a sudden, well, maybe I only want part-time. Honestly, I wanted to totally freak out. But of course, you just stay calm and collected and basically make the situation work out as best we can. And kind of getting back to the psych, because this person had also underlying psychological background, which was not part of the workers' compensation claim in this one specific case, but still we got to deal with it, Anything could come out of a person's mouth. So when certain psychological diagnoses are presented to myself, I'm already got my rehab counseling hat thinking, okay, well, maybe we should avoid these types of work. Maybe X, Y, and Z would be appropriate. And then that would be like one of my questions in my referral letter to the psychologist. Okay, I'm considering turning this person into a web designer. What are your thoughts on that? Is their personality appropriate for that type of work, and so on and so on? Now, choosing a consulting psychologist, same deal as it was for the medical expert. We need to find the right person. We don't want to send, again, someone that needs brain surgery, or for this say, someone that needs post-traumatic stress disorder treatment if the person is an expert in quitting smoking. That's just not going to work, and it's going to be a waste of my time, the resources from the third party, like an insurance carrier, employer, and my clients, consumers' time as well. So we have to do our homework and figure out who the best person in that community, because in a place like DC or New York or LA, there's going to be tons of people. But out in rural Montana, maybe not the case. So we need to do our homework and find out who's in the area, who can provide said services, and so on. We talked about the examination, like a TBI. This is an examination, the neuropsychological exam. That's what you need, because it's neurology plus psychology. So that's why I gave you the neuropsych examination in there. So please, it's up to you, but I would take the time to look through it to see what components are in there, the conclusions, and then imagine how I use that information in my evaluation. So lots of other things, like as basic as intelligence. If the person has an IQ of 50, I'm not going to be sending them to college. So that would be step one. Verbal comprehension is very important. If you can't read the textbooks, it's going to be hard to do well on certain assignments and exams and so on. Maybe, neurological functioning, maybe sensory functioning. Maybe the person has a hearing impairment, so I need to take that into account when I'm doing my planning. Motor coordination. So again, if the person has neurological issues that they have problems with dexterity or moving their arms or legs or something like that, I certainly will take that information into planning the rehabilitation plan and so on, which kind of leads us to reasonable accommodations. So when I come up with a barrier, okay, based on the medical eval and the psychological eval, client X's dream of becoming X, we got these problems. That's where I will put on my rehab counseling hat and think of reasonable accommodations. Is there ways either I can restructure the job, get some assistive technologies, get them some training. The goal is mitigate the barriers, level the playing field, put the ball in their court, and then it's up to the client or consumer. Another thing is, I don't know if you've noticed this about me, but you need to be optimistic, in my opinion, to be a good rehabilitation counselor. Why? Because people are dealing with all kinds of problems. And in many cases, there's no simple answers. In some cases, there is never going to be an answer. They're in chronic pain for the rest of their life, and that's just the way it's going to be. But if I can help them get a career going and be financially independent, they're going to be better off. Again, I can't take away the pain. I'm not God. But at least they will feel better about themselves and be able to support their family and so on. But that same idea is important for the psychologist. I don't want to send my client/consumer to someone that's just a downer, that's pessimistic and the sky is falling. No, I want to send my people to qualified, number one, but also people that are going to give them some hope, because that's part of what counseling really is. Now, perceived limitations. Now, you might have heard the expression, perception is reality. So, if this person has it in their head that they can only work X amount of time or lift X amount of weight, but all the doctors say no, they can do X plus 50%, then we got a problem, and we're going to need to try to counsel and speak with our client and figure out, where's this coming from? How can I help address this irrational beliefs? Sometimes it's barriers. Who knows? It could be a lot of different things. Physical barriers, attitudinal barriers, prejudice, stigma, you name it. But we need to get on top of that and really try to match up what they really can do with what our medical and psychological evidence is. Sometimes there's a big variance between the two. You'd be surprised. Now, negative reactions towards a person with disability. Now, for example, if I'm working with a person that, say, had a severe back injury and is a wheelchair the rest of their lives, and I'm going to be going with them on the interview, I want to prepare the employer. I don't want to just show up cold with the person in the wheelchair. They might be, oh my God, what's going on here? That will harm my client, make my job harder, and lower the probability that we're going to get a successful case closure out of this. So really, I need to prepare both client and employer, and role playing is effective with the client. Employers, you just kind of do what you can. Sometimes there can be cultural variables. If the person is used to, I don't know, say they're a construction worker and they're used to wearing ripped up jeans and AC/DC t-shirt. Hey, I love AC/DC, nothing there. But if we're going to try to get them a job in the office environment, that attire is just not appropriate. And we need to explain it to them and say it in ways that's not going to hurt their feelings or offend them or anything like that. But we just basically need to say, hey, or, sometimes there are other issues that might, be a little bit more touchier about culturally dress and stuff like that. I really never had too much trouble with that, but I know that some people and some employers might have a different opinion than what I do. Bottom line, the more visible the disability, we should prepare the employer better off for it. If it's a hidden disability, depression, PTSD, learning disability, whatever, then we need to speak with the client/consumer, explain the pros and the cons. Number one, you're not going to be covered by the American with Disabilities Act if you don't disclose this. Number two, you can be immediately terminated if you don't disclose your disability to them, and so on and so on and so on. Put the cards on the table, let the chips fall where they may. Again, the psychologist or psychiatrist that we refer our client/consumer to, they need to have experience working with this disability. Hopefully they've worked with thousands of people with similar conditions, just not, someone that's painting by numbers. This is my first client with PTSD. No, that's not cool. I'm not doing that. Also, we should be aware of what psychometric instruments, in other words, what tests are appropriate to get the information we need, like maybe the MMPI, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. There's so many different ones out there. That's a whole test and measurement class. I'll leave that to that professor. There are other issues, maybe the visual impairment, hearing impairment. These can also, basically the bottom line, give us some biased results, in other words, or English as a second language. I've taken interpreters with me when I do evaluations or meet with clients and stuff like that. One thing you really got to be super careful of, don't have a family member interpreting what I'm saying to the client, and so on. The psychologist should understand why I'm sending the person there, because I'm a rehabilitation counselor. Vocational issues I'm very, very interested in. And then basically, once they do their evaluation, communicate to me the client's strengths and weaknesses and how they'll, play out vocationally. Excuse me. So we need to identify, perhaps provide a synopsis of the person's psychological background and what's happened, what kind of treatment, what kind of resources do we perhaps have, and so on. We got to prepare the client/consumer for this whole thing. If they're going to, like the neuropsych eval that's in there, people probably spend 7 or 8 hours there. So if the person has no idea they're going to be spending that much time, as soon as you go through they go through the informed consent saying, okay, I'm the psychologist, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, here's all the tests we're going to take. The person might be like, well, I got to go pick up my kids in an hour. Well, obviously that's a problem. It goes back to us. We need to prepare the client about what to expect. I need to get appropriate data. I just don't want some fluffy report that doesn't tell me anything from the psychologist. So again, that should be addressed by a cover letter before, and what medical and psychological evidence I send to the psychologist for basically referral questions that I want answered. Okay, I'm thinking about X. What is your opinion? Can this person do it? And so on. So who needs a psychological evaluation? Now, in the public sector, it used to be that if someone was going to get training, so we're going to invest a year or two sending you to community college, many times they want a psych eval to get at the intelligence level and things like that. This is going to vary across the United States. In certain states, they still do it that way. Other states, it became too expensive. So I don't want to opine like, okay, this is the way it's going to be, and then you're in Utah, and we're like, well, no, we don't do that. So there's going to be some variations. But for me, before I even think of training, we talked about this last time, 2 things are critically important. Can they physically, mentally, emotionally do the job? That's a job analysis. Part 2, labor market data, which a labor market survey would say, okay, are the jobs there? What do they pay? And so on. If both of those are not positive, we're not going down the training road. I'm not going to waste my time on it, waste your time on it. So psych evals are usually recommended when long-term training is a possibility, that there's no easy alternatives. Okay, we'll just get you a job X. We're going to have to spend more time and money with this. Maybe the vocational goal is not feasible. Again, the person has had a severe brain injury and they want to go to college. Unfortunately, in some circumstances, that's just not going to happen. And then maybe the psychological eval can help this person digest where they are and what's going to come down the pike. Many times the counselor might think, wow, I see some red flags going on here. There might be stuff that I don't know about going on with this individual, or maybe the behavior is bizarre. Who knows what? That would be a good time for a psychological evaluation. And again, any kind of special issues like traumatic brain injury or PTSD and so on. So we talked about preparing the client for a psych eval. It's going to take time. We really need to explain like who, what, when, why, how are you going to get there, how long it's going to take, what kind of clothes to wear, be comfortable. We might even have to arrange transportation for them to get to the psych eval. We probably would be providing a synopsis on the person's vocational work background, medical history, psychological history, and the vocational goals or objectives that I'm considering as part of our referral questions. Sometimes psychological tests will pick up on things like learning disabilities or damage to the brain or central nervous system and so on. So then the question is, how is said damage going to affect them vocationally and so on? Really an important thing connected to that is, what's a prognosis? Are they going to get better? Are they going to get worse? Or is it episodic, like the stock market? It's all over the place. And again, I need that information for my future planning and recommendations, or I'm not doing my job right. How's their psychological functioning or lack thereof going to affect their rehabilitation? What barriers could we be facing? How's the client/consumer's level of judgment, reasoning, comprehension? Has it been affected by some, medical condition or something like that? Is there actually evidence of emotional disturbance? Some of these tests like the MMPI, they can pick up certain medical conditions. It's interesting because they might ask the same question 8 different ways. And the MMPI actually has a lie scale that's really interesting. Well, we'll get into that another time. But we're just looking for evidence of emotional and psychological issues that we're going to have to deal with in our counseling relationship with them. Are there certain environments that are bad for them? Conversely, are there certain environments that are better for them? How do they think that this person's personality is going to affect the job placement and employment and so on? Well, intellectual functioning, again, what's their general educational level and intellectual functioning? What's their intelligence range? Is there any evidence of a learning disability? Many times when I do my testing, I'll pick up on a learning disability that the person never even knew they had. They kind of just worked around it, especially if they're older. Because nowadays we're testing kids a lot more in school, but if the person, was like me and maybe was born in the 60s or 70s, depending on where they went to school, they might not even test for that kind of stuff. Of course, the intellectual capacity, their intelligence is going to flow into what I'm recommending, which flows into our rehabilitation plan. And then are there any limits on training? For example, in the state of Maryland, if I meet with the person and the IQ is off the charts, they're Einstein. By state law, the maximum training I can recommend in a workers' comp case is 2 years, no matter if they're Einstein. Now, if you're in the state VR system, that's going to be different. You'll probably have a lot more flexibility with that. But are there any rules or regulations that's going to affect the training that I could recommend? Some common sense things, hopefully the neuropsych or psychological eval might be able to pick up on, but I certainly would do my own thing, is what's the client's vocational interest? Are their expressed interests congruent with what they're saying their goals are? Are these interests reasonably correlated with their abilities? And then, of course, if I already have a game plan that I'm putting together, i.e. rehab plan or IPE, individualized plan for employment, I would say, okay, this is what my plan is. What do you think? So some of the things in the psych report, background information. So again, if you have that example printed out, you'll have it at your fingertips. The behavior during the assessment, I even put in what kind of clothes they wear, if they got tattoos all over the place, they got nose rings, or who knows what. But basically, this is just one piece of who they are. The IQ test results obviously are critically important. Their motor functioning, their social skills and maturity or lack thereof, the academic achievement testing. So some of you might give out things like the wide range achievement test that will give you, okay, the reading level is 12.2 grade level, arithmetic level is 10.5, reading comprehension is 11.1, and whatever. That's academic achievement data. The personality test, that's going to be up to the psychologist to pick what they're going to use. Summary conclusions, and then they may or may not have this as part of their standard report, but I certainly would ask, okay, what about my recommendations for VR services? So as you can see, we're getting about a half hour now. The psychological eval is a very important thing in the equation for vocational assessment or evaluation. In some cases, it is the most important thing. In others, it's less important. And in some cases, they won't even get a psychological evaluation. But for those that require this, it's going to be very important that we select the right provider, ask the right questions, and get a report that we can digest and utilize in our practice. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'd want to talk about. I think that kind of covers it. If you guys have any questions after reading the chapter and doing the DQs and stuff, let me know. But I think it's pretty straightforward. And that's why I gave you a great example. So when you're printing this out, you're like, oh my God, how much? First of all, how much does this thing cost? The one that I gave you probably costs at least $5,000. I don't even really know the exact cost, but it's thousands. And I think we talked about everything in the chapter. So if you guys need anything, please let me know. Remember, we got quiz 1 that should pop up in your announcements, and you just go into testing, or I think it's on their testing, and you'll have 2 hours to take the quiz. It's 2 essays. It's not going to be any surprise. If you ask DSS for accommodations and we've communicated that, don't worry, I've already got you covered. The weekly DQ, and work on the site visits. That should, I know a lot of people have been emailing me about that, so I think that's in the works. So without any further ado, I hope you guys have a great week. You need something, let me or Jenny know, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.